Hi everyone, welcome to the Brush Up on Content Paying for College webinar. My name is Sonia and I'm one of the curriculum developers and online professional development leaders here at NGPF. And I want to thank you guys so much for spending this hour with me as we dive deep into paying for college content. So what we're going to be doing today is obviously brushing up on content knowledge within the Paying for College unit, but I'm also going to be recommending specific NGPF resources for you to use as we go through the different areas of content knowledge. And some of you guys might be wondering, how is a webinar different from an NGPF virtual PD? I see a lot of familiar faces on this call and names, and I know a lot of people have attended these virtual PDs, so how is a webinar different? Well, our virtual PDs are very collaborative. Oftentimes you guys are working with each other in breakout rooms, but on a webinar, it's a little bit more kind of direct instruction, so it's going to be a lot of me providing more facilitation and just kind of talking and delivering material to you guys. All right, so let's get started. I want to show you guys where you can find all of our Paying for College material. And that it can be found on the NGPF website. And you can find all of the Paying for College materials specifically on the Paying for College unit page. And you can get there by going to Curriculum here and selecting Units. Or you can scroll down on the home page and just select Paying for College from here. So that's what I'm going to do. And here is our Paying for College unit page. So you can see here that on the left-hand side we have our semester course lessons and our full year lessons. And on the right-hand side we have a bunch of supplemental resources like activities, case studies, questions of the day, etc. Keep in mind that a lot of the resources here on the right-hand side are going to be embedded into the lessons on the left-hand side. Also keep in mind that in addition to the semester course lessons and full year lessons, we also have a 9-week course, an 18-hour workshop, and an 8-hour workshop, and I believe all three of those also have some Paying for College content. So definitely check it out. We have a lot of material based on how much you have to teach the content, so you have a lot of options to choose from. I also want to mention that all of the resources that I'm going to be showing you guys today, whether they're infographics or videos, articles, what have you, these are all coming directly from our lesson. So, don't worry about receiving a separate link for a specific video. All of these are from our lesson, so you will find these as you are going through the unit on your own. So, which actually is the perfect segue for me to explain that our Paying for College unit really is based on this central infographic that is provided by the Department of Education. And the reason we chose to really outline our unit with in tune with this infographic is because the infographic basically chronologically outlines the financial aid process for a student. So it kicks off with preparation, then you have to file the FAFSA, then you receive your financial aid award letter with different types of financial federal student aid. Then you're able to compare different award letters from different schools. Then you pick a school which you attend, and after you graduate, you're obviously going to enter into your repayment phase of any federal student loans that you received. So we really liked how this infographic kind of chronologically outlines everything. And what we've done is every single lesson kicks off with this infographic and specifies which stage of the infographic the student is going to be exploring in that lesson. So it just really is a nice roadmap for them to see, and it's just a really great visual representation of what they're going to be exploring. So that's why we picked this infographic. All right, so let's get started by kicking off with some foundational Paying for College knowledge. So, a lot of students might be wondering, why go to college at all? What are some of the advantages of doing so? And really, in the lessons, as you go through them, you'll see that we focus on both quantitative and qualitative advantages of going to college. Quantitative, obviously, you're going to have greater lifetime earnings as this chart down here specifies. It starts off with less than high school education, getting a high school a high school diploma, and then all of the way here up to a bachelor's degree, master's degree, and a doctoral degree. And besides the quantitative advantages, you also have a lot of qualitative advantages. As many of you guys know, a lot of college graduates will talk about how they grew personally. They made kind of life-changing connections, lifelong friendships from their time in college. You're also forced to step out of your comfort zone, and you just get a lot of exposure to different perspectives and experiences that really shape you as a human being. And so, going to college is a lot more than just your earning potential after you graduate. It becomes a lot about who you are as a person. Another key foundational topic within the Paying for College first lesson is net price. So as many of you guys probably know, a lot of students go to the college of their choice and they look up how much does it cost to attend, and they actually see the sticker price, which is the college's published cost of attendance. And usually this is a lot higher than what the student is going to be paying because it doesn't take into account the grants and scholarships that that student might be awarded in their financial aid award letter. So, the sticker price is what you see on the website, but what you want to do is subtract the grants and scholarships that you receive so that way you get the net price, which is actually what you are going to be paying for attending that school. Keep in mind that the net price, you don't subtract loans from the sticker price to get to the net price because grants and scholarships are obviously free money, and you don't want to take into account loans that might show up on your financial aid award letter. You just want to subtract the free money. So a great NGPF resource that we embed in our lesson for kind of kicking off the unit as a whole is called Discuss Paying for College with Your Parents. And the reason we really like this activity is because, one, I think teachers have always given us feedback that it's really hard to get students and parents talking with each other about money in general, and paying for college is probably one of the most important topics that parents and students could talk about. And so we created this activity with a lot of teacher input called Discuss Paying for College with Your Parents. And it really addresses this issue of how talking about paying for college can be awkward, it can be challenging. And so it really outlines kind of a specific step-by-step process that students can take to talk to their parents about how to pay for college. And so, in part one, they determine what they already know. Is there anything that maybe their parents and them have already discussed? And they're going to jot it down here. Part two is create an action plan. So they actually read this article about how to talk to your parents about paying for college, which really nicely outlines the steps that students can take. And it also gives them a bunch of things to take into consideration, like, hey, when is a good time of day to talk to your parents? Like, do you want to talk to them right after their parents walk through the door after a long day at work? Probably not. So things like that maybe students may not consider, the article does a really great job of breaking those things down. So they create their action plan, and then they actually talk to their parents and take down, write down any notes that they want to remember from the conversation. Now, up until this point, the activity is really optional for students to turn in because we know that this can be a really personal conversation, and they may not necessarily want to submit stuff that they've been writing down so far. So what we've done is we've divided the activity into two parts. So all of what they've done so far can be kept with them at home. They don't have to turn it in. And then what we've done is the rest of the activity here is what they can actually turn into you to grade or to just count for credit, and that's just a reflection piece. So they don't need to feel obligated to share any sensitive information, but it just gives them some kind of guiding questions to think about and reflect over their conversation. So this is a really great activity to kick off the lesson and some of these kind of foundational aspects of the Paying for College unit. All right, so let's move on to the next step. Again, you'll notice that we're going kind of in chronological order, similar to our unit and aligned to that infographic that I showed you at the beginning. So let's talk about the FAFSA. So what is the FAFSA? Rather than me talking to you guys, I thought it would be great to actually show you a video that we have in our lesson that really nicely breaks down what the FAFSA is. So I'm going to play that for you guys right now.
Getting ready to go to college? The free application for federal student aid, or FAFSA, is for you. It's what the federal government and colleges use to figure out your eligibility for financial aid. That's money for school in the form of grants, work study, student loans, and even some scholarships. If you plan to attend college in the fall, it's usually best to file your FAFSA in October or November, the year before you start. Check with the financial aid offices of the schools where you're applying to see when their priority filing deadlines are. If you miss your school's deadline, don't worry. Just file as soon as you can. But be aware that most schools have a limited amount of funds to award each year, and the earlier you submit your FAFSA, the better chance you have of receiving aid. You can fill out your FAFSA online at fafsa.gov. Be sure to get the URL right. Filing is free, but some shady scammers will try to trick you into paying to file. It'll probably take you less than an hour to complete your FAFSA. If you're a dependent student, you'll need both your and your parents' tax and W-2 forms from 2 years prior. For example, if you're filling out the 2017-18 FAFSA, you would use your 2015 taxes, 2016 taxes for the 2018-19 FAFSA, and so on. If you're independent, you'll only need to provide your own. You'll also need bank and investment statements, plus your Social Security card, driver's license, or proof of permanent residency. Got questions? FAFSA.gov offers helpful resources such as live online chat, phone agents, and email support. When you're ready, go to FAFSA.gov to submit your FAFSA. Your future awaits.
All right, so that video does a really great job of breaking down what the FAFSA is, and again, that is in one of our lessons. So just as a recap, the FAFSA gives you access to free aid, like scholarships and grants, and it gives you access to work study. Keep in mind that students have to earn this money through a job. And then obviously it also gives you access to federal student loans. Keep in mind that private loans are completely separate. Many state governments and colleges use the information that you put in your FAFSA to decide how much to give to you. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more. And you want to apply as early as possible. The FAFSA opens October 1st. So it's definitely in students' advantage to submit that as early as they can. So I wanted to break down some FAFSA misconceptions that you've probably heard from some of your students. So FAFSA misconception 1 is my parents make too much money, so I won't qualify for aid. So they make too much, their income is too high. So the facts are actually that there's no income cutoff to qualify for federal student aid. And if you don't file the FAFSA, you're just cutting yourself off from any state and school aid that you might receive if you were to submit the FAFSA. So, if students have any income requirement concerns, they just don't have to worry about that actually. Myth number 2 is only students with good grades will get financial aid from the federal government. And actually, most federal aid does not take your GPA into consideration, so students should really apply and submit the FAFSA no matter what their grades are. Myth number 3 is my parents are not US citizens, so I won't get aid. And it actually, your parents' citizenship status is not taken into consideration, so students should definitely still submit the FAFSA. All right, so we talked a bit about the FAFSA. So once students submit their FAFSA, they get the student aid report or their SAR. And you usually get this about 3 days to 3 weeks after you submit your FAFSA. And the SAR is really important because it's basically a report of everything that you put in your FAFSA. It's like a receipt. And it includes your expected family contribution, or your EFC. And it's really, really important to check your SAR thoroughly, because if there are any mistakes, it's going to impact how much you might receive in federal student aid. And schools also use your SAR to create a financial aid package for you. So just like how, whenever we shop, it's a good idea to just check your receipt to make sure that there weren't any kind of errors in what you were charged. It's a similar good idea to check your SAR, because it's going to be a report of everything that you put on your FAFSA. So if you do catch any errors, you want to update those immediately at fafsa.ed.gov. However, if your social security number is wrong for any reason, you might need to actually resubmit the FAFSA entirely. So that's another really good reason for why you should submit the FAFSA as early as possible, because the longer you wait, if you have errors, it's just going to postpone, the kind of aid that you might be eligible to receive. So here we have a number of resources from the NGPF curriculum that talks about the FAFSA. One of the easiest ones is the FAFSA deadlines, where students actually just do some research and find the deadlines for what it is to submit for the FAFSA. And just keep in mind that there is a federal filing period, there's a priority deadline. Schools sometimes have their own deadlines for submitting the FAFSA. There are state deadlines, and like I said, college deadlines here. So really, there are lots of different types of deadlines to submit the FAFSA, depending on the school that you are applying to and the state that you are in. Another thing to take into consideration is verification, which some students might be selected for. So that just sometimes can prolong the whole process itself. So this is a great activity to kind of have your students dive deep into those deadlines. Another one is analyzing a student aid report, where we actually have a sample student aid report that someone got after they submitted the FAFSA, and students actually have to go through that report and look at it themselves. And finally, we have a really awesome project here that if you plan to teach the paying for college content year over year, this is a great project to kind of have your students actually get real data on how many students file the FAFSA at their school. And it's really cool that if you do this project every year, you as the teacher can actually say, hey, last year it was this much, 5 years ago it was this much. Let's see how that data may have changed or not changed this year. All right, so let's talk about free money, or scholarships and grants. So scholarships are merit-based and grants are need-based. A lot of students might use these two terms interchangeably, but it's important to know that there is a difference, and that grants are really just dependent on your need for financial aid, and scholarships are usually based on your merit. So think, grade-based scholarships, sports-based scholarships. Grants are much more dependent on your need. And I wanted to show you guys another great video in our unit that talks a little bit more about scholarships. And again, these are merit-based types of free aid.
Scholarships are a source of free money that students can use to help pay for college. So obviously this is a great thing. And students can start looking for scholarships throughout their high school career. Most scholarships are available for students when they become seniors in high school. And then scholarships are available to students when they're in college as well. So scholarships are something that you should constantly be on the lookout for, and something that you will need to apply to. It might include filling out forms. It might mean writing essays. It might mean getting recommendation letters or submitting transcripts. Some of them are online, some of them are paper applications. Your school might actually announce different scholarships through their newsletter or on their website. And so it's something that you might need to be on the lookout for. You might have to pursue on your own.
I literally applied to every single scholarship I could ever think of. I Googled every Armenian scholarship because I'm an Armenian descent, but I'm also from Lebanon, so I Googled Lebanese scholarships. And the more I realized that the more specific you get on the scholarships, and the more likely you are to get it, because not everyone applies to those scholarships. And I was really fortunate enough that I almost received every single scholarship I applied to, because they were so specific to who I was, where I was from, and what I was going to be pursuing. And that saved me.
There's a number of scholarships out there, and sometimes it can be hard to figure out which ones you should apply to. I always encourage my students to apply to the local scholarships. So you should apply to the local scholarships. Those are the ones that might be limited to students in your school district or to a certain number of high schools or a certain region. And so you will have fewer students competing for those scholarships. So you might have a better shot of getting some of those scholarships.
Another great opportunity might be essay contests for scholarship dollars. They typically, again, require you to write some form of an essay, maybe anywhere from a page to 5 pages. Maybe also submit teacher recommendations, your SAT scores, even your transcript. So that extra amount of work sometimes deters students from doing that. So if you're willing to put in that extra work, you'd be surprised to see how many extra scholarship dollars you may be able to get.
Some students go into the scholarship process thinking that scholarships are only for the students with the highest GPA or the highest test scores, and that's absolutely not true. Scholarships are for everyone, everyone who's willing to put in the work in order to apply for those scholarships.
All right. So that was definitely a more detailed breakdown of what scholarships are and just tips on how to find scholarships that you will probably have a higher chance of getting. One of the most important things that I thought was talked about in that video was the fact that the more specific you get in your scholarship search, the higher chance you have of getting that money for your education. I think a lot of students get overwhelmed with the number of scholarship opportunities out there because there are literally thousands of scholarships available to them. And so I think the key thing to really stress there is be specific, think about your background, because then you just have a higher chance of getting that financial aid. All right, let's switch gears to grants. So grants are, again, also types of free money, but these are need-based. And there are 3 types of grants. The federal grant, college-based grants, which are sometimes awarded straight to you, and other times you actually have to find what grants are available for a school and apply. So that's a really important distinction to make, that some schools will just look at your need and give you the award straight to you, and other ones you actually have to do the research. It's a separate application and you have to find out when those deadlines are and apply separately. And then finally, the third type of grant is private. So these are grants given by outside organizations and companies, and so students will have to do some research to find those opportunities as well. And of course, NGPF has a resource that helps students do real research on finding scholarships and grants that they may be eligible for. So again, this can be found in our lessons and also on the Paying for College unit page. So they first brainstorm strategies on getting a scholarship or grant. They also spend a good amount of time learning about scams that they may see, because a lot of people unfortunately do take advantage of the fact that students are younger, they may not be aware of scams, and so they'll collect personal information from students. So it's really important that students know, what are some signs of a scholarship scam. So they spend some time here looking into that. Then they actually take some time to narrow down their own criteria. So they think about what their personal background is, maybe what academic area that they're thinking of pursuing, any extracurriculars that they currently do, etc. And then they actually start researching scholarships and grants that they may be eligible for. And what I really like about this activity is that they actually have a plan of action. So not only do they do the research, but then they actually go the step further in thinking about, how am I really going to sit down and write these applications, and how am I actually going to apply? Because I think that's probably one of the hardest things for students when they have so many competing priorities going on. And finally, we've provided a bank of grants and scholarship links that students can use to kind of kick off their research while doing this activity. So that is another really great activity for students to do that is real world and will really benefit them as they're trying to find these financial aid opportunities. All right. Let's talk now about student loans. So we talked about free money. Let's talk about money that obviously students may have to borrow to fund their education. So I want to kick things off by talking a little bit about federal versus private student loans. And again, we have a really awesome infographic provided by the Department of Education. I'm going to zoom in a little bit here. And there are just a lot of key differentiators between federal and private student loans that are displayed in this infographic. I'm not going to go into every single one in detail, but main things to kind of note here are things that are different are repayment, interest rates. Obviously, interest rates for federal student loans are usually going to be fixed and lower. With private student loans, sometimes those interest rates can be insane, like 18%. I've seen even higher. So private student loans can definitely kind of take a much worse toll on students' student loan debt. The other major thing is that a lot of times federal student loans, you can get subsidized loans where the interest that accrues on that loan will be subsidized by the government, and I'll be talking a little bit about that. Private student loans don't usually have this. Federal student loans, you don't need to get a credit check, whereas private student loans may require a credit check. Same with a cosigner. Interest that is accrued on a federal student loans may be tax deductible, whereas with a private student loan, it may not be. Federal student loans, you usually have more payment options, so you just have a little bit more flexibility, whereas a private student loan they're just usually like, nope, once here are the terms, you have to pay it no matter what. Similarly, with a federal student loan, you usually have more options in your repayment plans versus private student loans, it's usually like one, maybe two, etc. Prepayment penalty fees, a lot of times students are really shocked to find out that if they pay off their loan earlier than when the due date was, they might be charged a fee with a private student loan versus a federal student loan. There's no prepayment penalty fee. And then again, with federal student loans, you may be eligible to have some portion of your loans forgiven if you work in public service. However, it is important to do a little bit more research on that because there have been some articles lately that are saying that this program hasn't been as well utilized or implemented, as they had stated. So it is important to kind of look a little bit deeper into that. And then finally, with federal student loans, you have, free help here. Private student loans, you're going to have to really do some research on who your lender is and then contact them directly. So for the purposes of the webinar, I'm going to focus a little bit more specifically on federal student loans, but if you do want to have your students dive a little bit deeper into private student loans, that infographic is a great place to start. So I'm going to show you another video that, again, I thought it would be better than me talking to you guys. It really just breaks down the different types of federal student loans that are available to students.
If you've received a financial aid award letter from a college, chances are you've been offered a federal student loan. To help you understand your options, let's take a look at 3 of the most common federal loan types: subsidized direct loans, unsubsidized direct loans, and direct plus loans. All 3 are fixed interest loans, which means that the amount of interest you'll have to pay stays the same until you pay off the loan. The most popular federal loan for undergrads is the subsidized direct loan. Subsidized means that the federal government pays the interest on your loan while you're still in school at least half-time. Meanwhile, with an unsubsidized direct loan, interest starts building up right away. So if you accept an unsubsidized loan, it's a good idea to at least make your interest payments while you're still in school. The government also offers something called direct plus loans. These are very similar to unsubsidized direct loans, but they're offered to graduate and professional students, as well as parents of dependent undergrads. No matter what type of federal loan you choose, be sure to borrow wisely and never borrow more than what you need. And remember, student loans are for your school expenses, not your lifestyle. Still have questions? Visit stepuputah.com.
All right. So again, that video does a really good job of breaking down the different types of federal student loans that students might be eligible for when they submit the FAFSA. Again, just some key highlights were that, if you get a subsidized direct loan, that means the government is actually paying the interest for you as interest is accruing. Unsubsidized loans, that's not going to happen. A little bit more about Parent Plus loans is that students should be really wary of these because, one, they require a credit check, and the most important things here is that they really have a high interest rate. The other thing is that these are loans that only parents are eligible for, and so the parents are actually legally responsible for paying off the loan. So even if the student is actually paying their parents and the parents are making the payments, legally the parents are the ones who are responsible for paying it off. So it's important for parents to also know that. And you're oftentimes required to begin paying back the loan after it's been fully dispersed. So there's just a lot of things to be cautious about when accepting a Parent Plus loan. A lot of times these kinds of loans are embedded into the financial aid award letter, and so you have to really have your attention to detail has to be pretty on, so that way you can make sure that you catch this loan in your student award letter. A lot of students will ask, how much student loan debt should I take on? Like, what is a good number? And a good rule of thumb that we've come across a lot of different resources is that your total student loan debt should not exceed your expected first-year salary after graduating college. And this is something that a lot of kind of experts say. It's not the only rule of thumb, but it's one of the most popular ones that we've seen. So another thing to keep in mind is that there are actual limits on how much you can borrow each year in federal student loans, and those are dependent on the year of school that you are in. Again, this article here that I'm showing you guys right now is in our lesson, and it does a really good job of breaking down how much you can borrow based on your dependency status and the year of school that you are in. So you can see here that if you're a freshman and you're a dependent, you can borrow up to $5,500, and no more than $3,500 of this amount can be in subsidized loans. You can see that the amounts are going to increase based on your year, and it'll also increase based on if you are an independent student. So a lot of students don't know that there are limits on federal student loans, so this is really important to point out. The other thing to keep in mind is obviously the interest rates currently on federal student loans. Right now for undergraduate, direct subsidized, and direct unsubsidized loans, the interest rate is 4.53. And for graduate or professional, which you may or may not be teaching, it's 6.08 for direct unsubsidized loans. So, because of those limits, students may or may not meet the total amount that they need to cover their cost of attendance. So, they might have gotten grants and scholarships and federal student loans, but they may still need more money to fund their education. So this is where you can then look to private loans and plus loans, but of course you want to make sure that you use them wisely. Another thing to keep in mind is that anytime you borrow you take out a loan to cover your cost of attendance, you're going to sign a promissory note when taking out a loan, which basically says, I agree to pay off this loan within the terms of the loan. And of course, it's really important to talk to students about being a responsible borrower. So like that video said, anytime that you borrow the money, make sure that that money is being spent towards your education, not a vacation, not spring break, stuff like that. Some other tips are find a school that is the right fit for you educationally and financially. Lots of great options in state versus out of state. That can be a huge cost saver. And know your expected starting salary, going back to that rule of thumb. You don't want to be accumulating a lot of student loan debt, especially if you think that your starting salary after graduating is going to be a little bit lower. So it's really important to consider how much of my paycheck is going to be going towards my monthly student loan payment. And so that can take some research and some time, and NGPF has a lot of activities that will walk students through that that mathematical calculation and just kind of scaffolds that kind of work. And it's also really important to let students know that they can actually work with their loan servicer. They should definitely know who they should be contacting if, for any reason at all, they are unsure of the terms of their loan or the repayment options available to them. And here are some of the activities available to you to help students understand the different types of student loans that they have. I really like Analyze Student Loan Decision Making. Reason is because in this activity, students are going to be looking at 3 different students: Jada, Dwayne, and Megan. And each one of these 3 students have a different profile. So you can see here that there's a short description, and it also talks a little bit about, what schools they're interested in, what occupation that this student is thinking of pursuing post-graduation. And they actually look up, what do they think that their starting salary is going to be based on their major, how much are they borrowing, stuff like that. And so it's just a really great activity for students to kind of maybe get out of their own head and look at maybe some hypothetical situations and understand, what borrowing decision makes the most sense for this person in this activity. So it's really great for them to get some practice before they maybe do the research for themselves. All right, let's talk about the financial aid award letter. So by this time, students have submitted their FAFSA, they've gotten their student aid report, they're thinking about the different types of loans that they might be taking out, and finally they have gotten their financial aid package from any school that they have gotten an offer of acceptance from. So obviously, each school is going to be sending students a different financial aid package, and so it's the student's job to carefully analyze every single financial aid package that they get. Unfortunately, as you guys probably know, each financial aid package is formatted very differently. It's not the easiest to understand which school is offering the best deal. And so I've seen a lot of students, create spreadsheets. They will, take their financial aid package and use the spreadsheet to calculate what their net price is going to be, and that way they can more easily compare across the board, which of the schools that I was accepted into makes the most financial sense. Here's another great video that I'll be showing you on how to read your aid award letter that a lot of students might find useful.
After colleges send you acceptance letters, they'll send you another letter that's just as important: your financial aid award letter. There's no standard format, but they all have the same basic information. Here are 4 tips on how to read your award letters and figure out which school is offering you the best financial package. Tip number 1. Understand the cost of attendance. The letter gives you the real cost of attendance, or COA. It includes tuition and fees, room and board, books, and even living expenses. You may find the school costs more than you thought. Tip number 2. Figure out how much financial aid you're getting. The letter lists how much financial aid you're being offered, including grants, scholarships, and WorkStudy. You don't have to pay back any of these. WorkStudy is a job on campus with pay. You can use that money for living costs. You'll also see your eligibility for federal student loans, which you will have to pay back with interest. Tip number 3. Do some simple math. Once you've found those key numbers, subtract them from the cost of attendance. The remainder is what you'll have to pay on your own, through private student loans or with other funds. Tip number 4. Compare your offers. You'll get an award letter from every school that's accepted you and where you've requested financial aid. Comparing them can be tricky. The easiest way is with a simple spreadsheet. Seeing them side by side can be helpful. Or you can use an online calculator. The College Board has one that lets you compare up to 4 schools. Keep in mind, the school with the highest price may have more money to offer you, so it may actually cost less. You need to do the math for each school. Now that you know how much each school will cost, it's time to decide which one is right for you. Good luck, and see you on...
All right, so that video, just again reiterates, it can be a little bit challenging to compare these award letters, but you can just systematically go through each one, compare them side by side, maybe use a spreadsheet or something similar to easily compare and figure out which school makes the most financial sense for you. Again, I just want to reiterate, look out for those Parent Plus loans that are kind of hidden in your aid. And also keep in mind that any work-study money that students may get is money that they have to earn through a job. It's not money that they are awarded like a grant or a scholarship. One of the really awesome activities that you can have students do is the fine print financial aid package. This activity has 2 sample financial aid award letters that are, of course, differently formatted from each other. And students have to analyze these 2 award letters and then answer 10 multiple choice questions based on those letters, and then also answer an 11th question that is a little bit deeper reflection on the award letters. So this activity gives them a lot of practice on reading the award letters before maybe they've even gotten their own. All right, let's talk a little bit about budgeting in college because, not only is it important to know how you're going to pay for college, but it's also important to know how you're going to manage your money while you're in college. And so we're just going to spend maybe just a brief amount of time just reviewing some basics for this section of the unit. So, as I'm sure you guys have found, a lot of challenges that students face when budgeting for college is that they have a hard time identifying sometimes what is really a need and what is a want. And, when they're on their own, this is really, really important for them to be able to know. Obviously, overspending is a big challenge. Incorrectly estimating their income versus their expenses. This can maybe require some tweaking as time goes on, especially when they're first starting school. One of the biggest challenges is failing to track their own expenses, failing to adjust their budgets as they go, and failing to check their bank account balances to make sure that they don't overdraft, right? So just a lot of kind of money management skills that students may be having to utilize for the first time and they're on their own. So for these purposes, NGPF has 2 really awesome resources. One is College Needs versus Wants, where students will actually identify, is getting a new laptop a need or a want? Is getting a Netflix subscription or a Spotify subscription a need or a want? And they're going to do this for their own selves, and then they will actually compare how they assessed their needs and wants with a partner, and they'll hopefully also see that needs and wants vary per person, and there's no right or wrong answer, but it's very dependent on what you value, what you want, what you need. And so that's a really great activity to do with students. This other activity, Create a Monthly College Budget, actually walks students through a spreadsheet and has students decide for themselves how much they are going to be using per month on certain expenses that they're likely to encounter when they start college. So it's a very real world activity, probably will take up a whole class period for you, but it's super fun. We've gotten a lot of great feedback from teachers that this is one of the most useful activities that they've done with students because students get really into it. They recognize the value of it. So highly recommend that one. All right, now let's talk about student loan repayment. So this is the kind of stuff, obviously, that students are probably feeling the most worried about because of all the press, all the news about, America's student loan debt crisis. So let's dive in. So I want to talk a little bit about the importance of graduating and how that impacts your student loan debt. So this chart here, which I think is from one of our data crunches, really highlights the importance of graduating. You'll notice that this is a chart that talks about the percent of borrowers who defaulted from 2014. And you'll notice something that might be a little bit counterintuitive, that the students who had the least amount of debt had the most trouble paying it off. I think a lot of us would probably think the students with the most debt had the most trouble paying it off, but it's actually the opposite. And the reason for this is because students with the least amount of debt, if you look at the amount, it's $1,000 to $5,000. These are likely students that did not actually finish school because of the amount that they owe. So you can kind of see, because it's not very common, unfortunately, for students to owe this amount of money. And so these are, again, students who likely were not able to finish their degree. They had to drop out for some reason. And so they're probably not in a job afterwards that is very high paying or allows them to pay off their student loans. And so that just leads to a lot of financial difficulty. You're going to have more trouble paying off your loan because you can't allocate as much of your paycheck towards your loan repayment plan. You're going to have more interest accruing. And so it just builds and builds and builds. And so this chart is really a great one to show students that, hey, one of the key ways you can help yourself is to make sure that you finish your education and you graduate and you get that diploma, because otherwise you're kind of hurting yourself in the long run. So typically, after you graduate, you enter a grace period, which is usually about 6 months for federal student loans. If students took out any private loans, they want to check with their private lenders to see if they even have a grace period and what that is. Typically, students will choose a repayment plan, and by default, they are entered into a standard repayment plan, which has students paying off that loan within 10 years. Obviously, there are a lot of other repayment plans that I'll get into in just a second. Another little tip that I have is set up automatic payments, just like you would for like a bill. It keeps you from being late, and also sometimes they might actually decrease your interest rate by 0.25 or 0.5%. So just a little bit, but it can go a long way. So here's an infographic that breaks down all the different types of federal student loan repayment plans. And so like I said, by default, students are usually entered into the standard repayment plan, but there are lots of other plans here like graduated, extended, income-driven plans, lots of different options. So definitely take a look at this really awesome infographic by NerdWallet to compare these different options. Let's talk a little bit about loan consolidation. So the advantages of loan consolidation is that it can help you manage your loan payments. If you have loans from different providers, this can really help you manage them, because then you're just responsible for paying one entity your monthly payment. And so this can be really helpful for students who struggle to pay multiple lenders, and especially if they don't have things on auto pay, it can get really messy. So that's a big advantage. It can potentially also lower your monthly payment because your term increases. Now, the downside of that, as you well know, is that you can end up paying more over time because of the interest. If your term increases, that means you're paying more in interest. You may also lose some borrower benefits that came with your original lender. So you want to make sure that if you decide to consolidate, what potential benefits might you be losing? The other thing to think about is that once you consolidate your loans, you can't undo that. So it's definitely something that students should think carefully about, do the math, make sure that they're making a right financial decision, and then move forward with it. All right, let's also talk about deferment and forbearance. So these are two options that you want to think about if you're having trouble paying off your student loans for any reason. It's also an option if you are entering grad school. A lot of times, I think from the top of my head, I think you enter forbearance. But I have to kind of double check on that. One of these options are what you select. It's actually deferment. It's right here. You have to meet certain qualifications. So deferment and forbearance basically allow you to postpone your loan payments. So again, you have that grace period of 6 months. You enter in repayment term. And then let's say that, either your income decreases or you enter graduate school or something happens and you're having some trouble. You can select to defer or forbear your student loan payments. Now, the difference is deferment is usually the preferred option because you're not going to have any interest accrue on those subsidized loans. With forbearance, your interest continues to accrue, so if you don't pay that interest, it's going to be capitalized or added to your principal. And again, for both options, you have to meet certain qualifications. So you can choose these options if you're having trouble paying off your loans. The main thing to keep in mind and to stress to students is that they do not want to default on their loans. That's going to hit their credit score, it's going to impact them in multiple ways financially and just kind of hinder their options after graduation. So if they're having trouble in any way in repaying their student loans, they should definitely work with their student loan provider, work out an option. The lender definitely wants to get their money back, so they're going to try to figure out a way to get their money back that also works for you. All right, I'm going to leave some time at the end here for some questions, but that basically concludes our Paying for College Brush Up on Content webinar. I want to thank you so much for joining me today. Hopefully this was a good refresher for some of the content that you plan to teach, and thank you again for joining. I do want to also highlight that we have a really awesome new mini unit that we released for alternatives to four-year colleges. And you can find that, again, by going to the curriculum, going to units, scrolling down and going to the mini units section. And the mini unit is mini unit number 3, alternatives to four-year colleges. And so you'll see that we cover a lot of different options if you have students who are not planning on going on to college. We cover the military, entering the workforce right after high school, associate degrees, trade schools, apprenticeships, internships, taking a gap year. So this is a really, really great mini unit to do simultaneously with the Paying for College unit, or even, just kind of do both if you have time for it. All right, so definitely check out the Paying for College unit, check out that mini unit on alternatives to colleges, check out the semester course if you are thinking of using the full year course but you're like, I don't have enough time for that. Check out the semester course for a slightly condensed version of that unit. And of course, if you have any questions at all, feel free to email me at sonia@ngpf.org. Make sure you join our Facebook group, FinLit Fanatics. We have thousands of personal finance educators there that you can ask and post and kind of just join the community. So lots of different options and resources here for you. Again, thank you so much for joining me today. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and hope to see you guys soon on some more online PD.